Episode 3, Race and Sexual Orientation. Hello everyone and welcome to Monday Moments with Mabinti. And yes, as you can see, I'm not on my own today. I have my wonderful now friend, former colleague, but now very much a friend, Emma Palmer Ems. I'm going to hand over to Emma to just introduce themselves.
Oh, thanks so much, Mabinti. And it's lovely to be on Monday Moments. I feel quite proud. It's really nice. So thanks for inviting me. So my name's Emma Palmer. For those of you that don't know me, my pronouns are she and her. And in terms of like my day job and what I do, I'm the head of inclusion and equity in an organisation called Impact Culture. And we are a consultancy, and our main work is around social justice and supporting organisations through that lens on their culture piece, and on their EDI journey. My background is I used to be a police officer. I started my career in the Metropolitan Police, and I was a police officer for 8 years. And then when I left, I took a bit of a year to think about what it is that I wanted to do. What was I really passionate about? What drove me to get up every single day? And it's always been social justice work and inclusion work. So since then I've worked with various organisations, supporting them on their inclusion journeys, and I've done that through workshops and strategy and consultancy. And I focus on LGBT inclusion, race equity work and intersectionality. So broad range, and I've also, as Mabinti will tell you, I've worked with a broad range of organisations as well. I'm also a trustee. I sit on the board of trustees at LGBTQ Young Persons Trust Mosaic, and yeah, that's an incredible role, and I'm really privileged to help the organisation support young people with services across London.
That sounds all fantastic, and I've worked with Emma in the past, so I know Emma's great, really passionate and just fantastic at what she does. And I'm not being biased, it's the truth. I'm sure many who've worked with you, Emma, will say the same. So before we get into today's conversation, which will look at intersectionality, particularly around race and sexual orientation, I wanted us to have just a little bit of fun, a little bit of an icebreaker. So we're going to play this or that. So I'm going to give you 2 options, and you'll need to pick one of the 2 options. So the first one is music or dancing?
Music.
Music. Ah, why?
Music for me is joy. I was brought up on all different types of music, and yeah, I just love it. I love music. I danced at school. I used to be that kid turning up to the discos, school discos, in my shell suit, trying to break dance, copying Nana Cherry and all the dance moves. But I don't know what happened. Something switched, because as an adult, I've got 2 left feet. I think I've got rhythm. In my head, I look good. And then I see myself on videos or in the mirror and I don't look good.
No, I'm sure you're still doing your thing on the dance floor, Emma. Okay, so the next one is apple crumble or apple pie?
Oh, that's easy. Apple crumble.
Yeah, I agree. With custard or ice cream?
Custard for me. Yeah.
Ding, 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 ding. Yep. There are no right answers, but that was a right answer.
That's the right answer. Yeah.
So my next question is Instagram or LinkedIn?
That's a hard one, because I love Instagram. I'm on it a lot. I post a lot, and I've rediscovered LinkedIn over the last sort of 2 years. If I was to choose one, I'd say I use them for different things. Instagram.
Oh, Okay, I think yeah, that's that's. I was going to say if that's the right answer because I find I love LinkedIn,
Hmm.
but I find there are lots of LinkedIn police, which then makes me a bit apprehensive about what I want to post. But I wonder if it could be a combination of both for Instagram. You could do on LinkedIn, like post a bit of personal stuff, being your true authentic self, but
Yeah.
also post the professional and all of that stuff. So showing your yeah, go on, Emma.
Well, no, I agree because I find that Instagram people do post their professional, whatever you want to call professional, but activist, advocacy, workplace stuff on Instagram. I feel like over the last few years, LinkedIn has become that.
Yeah.
I've also seen quite a few thirst traps as well on LinkedIn. So it's it's kind of morphing into that space now. I don't really know how I feel about it. I think LinkedIn should be, for anything and everything, but that I'm not sure. Nah.
I 100% agree with you. I get these messages all the time and I'm like, blocker, blocker, blocker. Sorry, I have to just block because this ain't Tinder and yeah.
It's not Tinder, it's not a dating site. And I see these like big posts, you've got reams and reams and reams of words talking about, really something really meaningful, really hard hitting, and then this picture of the person that has nothing to do with what they've written. Like, it's like, where's the correlation? It doesn't make sense to me. So yeah, I've got strongish feelings about LinkedIn and that kind of vibe. But for me, I use it to learn. I follow quite a few people that are incredible. And they're doing amazing things in the EDI space. So for me, it's a really good tool to keep up to date with what's going on. People like your good self,
Oh, thanks. And your good self too. I'll definitely put a link in this post with Emma's LinkedIn profile so you can go and follow Emma and find out all the wonderful things Emma's doing. A last this or that question is, are we 80s music or are we 90s music? Which one would you pick?
Okay, so we are late 80s for sort of UK soul,
Ooh.
90s for R&B, New Jack Swing,
Yep.
the 80s generally for the synth, that kind of synth wave era, new romantics. Yeah, I've got quite a broad taste. So for me, it's similar to the whole LinkedIn, Instagram thing. It's a combination of both. Can we just go back to apple pie and ice cream? Do you remember
Yeah.
when McDonald's did apple pie and ice cream?
Yeah.
Loved it.
So
I
what
just
are we saying? Apple pie and are we moving on from
no. We're still
apple?
saying apple crumble and
Custard.
custard, but there was a moment in time when McDonald's were hitting it and they were doing apple pie and ice cream, and it was with caramel sauce. It was the best.
Can I controversial? I hate with a passion McDonald's is apple pie. Oh my gosh. I just for me, it's just if you think about food health, for me, that's my food health.
We can't be friends.
Can't stand it. Lots of my friends are like, "Are you okay, Mabinti?" I'm like, "Yeah, I just can't." The smell of the cinnamon, oh, puts me off instantly.
Really? I love
Yeah.
cinnamon. Oh,
See,
that's me.
I can't stand cinnamon. But
Okay.
anywho, I digress. Just a bit of fun, a bit of an icebreaker. So yeah, we found out Emma loves apple crumble and custard, sits on the fence on the debate of Instagram or LinkedIn. That's all good. So let's get into today's episode. So today marks day one, which is Monday, the 6th of February, marks day one of Race Equality Week, which is run by Race Equality Matters. And it's also coincides with LGBTQ plus History Month. And Emma, I just thought it'd be good for you to just share your story with us, because I've heard this when we worked together. And I know also you worked with Stonewall for a bit, and our paths did cross, although we didn't quite meet. But I was at a university at the time, and Emma came to deliver role modeling, LGBTQ plus role models training for our staff members. So I know you're really outspoken in this space, and I just wondered if you could start off by sharing your lived experience as a Black or as a mixed heritage woman, and being LGBTQ plus.
Yeah, thanks, Mabinti. So I came out 20 years ago, and I've often told this story in the sense that when I came out, I didn't struggle. I didn't have a difficult coming out experience, and that isn't always the case with a lot of LGBTQ people. There's pain, there's trauma, there isn't acceptance, there's rejection, and I didn't have any of that. I thought I might, but I didn't. And when I was at school, I had these feelings, but I didn't really know what to do with them, and they were often fleeting. I questioned my sexuality, but I didn't think that much of it. I just put it to the back of my mind. And then when I came out when I was, so I'm 40 now, I came out when I was 20, 21, and my mum embraced it. My stepdad embraced it. And I remember the day I had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that my mum was going to ask me if I was gay. And she set it up really well. The night before, she said, do you want to go to London and go shopping for the day, Covent Garden? And we didn't really do that a lot. So I was like, reluctantly, I said, yeah, okay. Thinking, she's going to ask me, am I gay? And we went to this Italian restaurant, and she sat me down. We sat down, and within the first 2 minutes, I looked at the menu, and she said to tell me about yourself. And quote unquote, I said, my name's Emma. I think I'm a nice person. And she said, no, are you gay? And I said, yeah, I'm gay. Yes, I'm gay. And I think I was trying to deflect it because I started to make jokes and I was trying to be funny, but she just said, right then, that's all I wanted to know. Now, what do you want to eat? And yeah, there was no big fuss. There was no, big issue. She just accepted it. And we talked a lot afterwards. There was lots of conversation about me growing up and how I got to that point, but she just embraced it. And then I got home, and my stepdad was equally as proud, and he embraced it. And then my auntie Barbara, who's sadly not with us anymore, but my mum rang her, told her if anyone made a fuss, it was Barbara. She cried, she was proud, she was all the things. And then that day we went to see her for a barbecue, and she flung the door open. And the first thing she said was, oh my God, Emma, my gay niece, come here. And she gave me the biggest hug. And I was Emma, her gay niece, for that day. And there were people in the family that I'd met. They knew me. I knew them because they were family friends. But everyone she saw, she went, Emma, come over here. This is Emma, my gay niece. And she was introducing me as Emma, her gay niece, to people that I'd already known and that they knew me. But she was just so proud to, to kind of accept it and accept me. So my coming out experience was hugely positive. And yeah, I didn't have any issues at the time. And then I was sort of flung into the LGBT scene. I worked in a gay bar called GAY in London, and for 2 years solidly, I was out all weekend, every weekend, living my best gay life. And it wasn't until I think later in my life that I became more aware of my race, the intersection between my race and my sexuality, just through some of the experiences that that I had in terms of racism at certain events. And yeah, that was weird, because you have this great experience coming out, and then it's not until later you know there's no acceptance, or it's pointed out to you, and you're like, okay, this doesn't make any sense to me. And then you start talking to other people that look like you, who've had similar experiences, and then you find a community like UK Black Pride that is specifically for Black and brown folk, and in response to the discrimination and the racism that we faced. And you think, wow, you know, this is incredible. You know, I found my community. And then within that community, you experience racism yourself, just in different ways. It's so weird, and it's exhausting. But yeah, I think for me, having such a positive coming out experience was something I'll never forget. But you know, the experiences that I've had later have really yeah, they've been really damaging and really harmful, I think, to the way I view myself. Not so much these days, but you know, it really did cause me to feel some sense of shame and guilt about who I was.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing, Emma. That was really insightful, and I think quite inspiring, especially that your mum or your parents were really welcoming. I know firsthand, being, you know, from a West African background, heritage, that there's still a lot of stigma around a Black and brown, not just West African, but Black, African, Caribbean, South Asian, Eastern Asian, just people of color, are still a stigma surrounding sexual orientation in correlation with being a person of color, essentially. So I think it's really inspiring to hear your story, and to hear that that wasn't your experience, to be excluded from your family, or to have to further hide or stay in the closet, should I say, and not come out fully, for fear of being harmed, or again being excluded from your family. And I just wanted us to just dig a bit deeper into that, and you know, the experiences of Black people of color who experience exclusion from their communities, but also are searching for that inclusion, or searching for that family within the LGBTQ plus community, but are then experience racism. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, really.
It reminded me of when I was working at Stonewall, and I was doing a charity bike ride, and I asked my mum and my stepdad to sponsor me. And I was asking them for weeks and weeks and weeks, you know, when are you going to sponsor me? When are you going to sponsor me? And they just kept saying, well, you know, we'll sponsor you later, we'll sponsor you later, and never did. And I became really, like, I started to think, well, why are they not sponsoring me? What's going on? Do they have an issue now that I'm, you know, working at Stonewall and I'm working for an LGBTQ human rights organisation? My mum and dad both became born again Christians, and I started to sense that there was an issue, that there was some sort of tension between their faith and my sexuality, and maybe having to reconcile it. I wasn't quite sure, but I felt something. So I asked my stepdad outright. I said, you know, why are you and mum not sponsoring me? Do you have an issue with me being gay? And this was about 7 or 8 years ago. And he just kept fobbing me off, and he said, speak to your mum, speak to your mum. So I did speak to my mum, and she openly told me, you know, since, you know, finding, you know, God and Jesus, I am struggling. She was reading the Bible a lot, and she was having all these different thoughts and emotions about my sexuality and her faith. And I couldn't quite understand it, because 20 years previously she was embracing it, and now she was almost going backwards to this fear zone that she was in. And through, you know, lots of conversations and lots of talks, I think she's come back to this growth zone again, where she sat previously. But it isn't like that for a lot of people. There's a rejection that stays, and there's an isolation from friends and family that is forever. And you find new family within the community. You're like your chosen family, I guess. And so when you start to layer on all these other complexities around race and culture and belief systems and I guess laws that have existed for centuries, and when you start to think about all those things and how they apply to certain people and the way they behave and treat you, it doesn't make sense, but it does make sense because it's entrenched in the system, it's entrenched in their belief system. And so I think my experiences of racism within the community, perhaps within my family as well, both homophobia and racism are kind of over and insidious. And it's, you know, it's really interesting to me that a space you're supposed to feel safe in, you know, you don't feel quite safe and you don't feel like you can be yourself. And I link it back to a Stonewall report that was came out 4 or 5 years ago, the Home and Communities report, and it highlighted that over 50% of people of colour said that they experienced discrimination or poor treatment from people within the LGBT community because of their race. And then in addition to that, 3 out of 5 Black LGBT people said that they experienced prejudice on account of their ethnicity. So, you know, they're statistics, but there are real life stories behind them. And it reminded me of when I was dating a girl and we went to Manchester to meet some of her friends for the weekend, and I'd never met any of her friends before. And it was the first time that I was meeting one of her best friends. And I remember before we met him, I met him, she warned me about him before we met. She kept saying that, you know, he was quite provocative. She kept playing his behavior down, but she'd say things like, you know, he's a really nice guy, but he can say things that might come across as offensive. He doesn't mean it. He just likes to push the boundaries. And I was like, okay, what does that even mean? But sure. And we went to this bar, a very well-known bar in Manchester, a very well-known gay bar in Manchester. And I was prepared for some of the banter that she warned me of, but I wasn't prepared for what he actually said to me when I met him. And we walked into this bar, and within the first 5 minutes, we exchanged, you know, pleasantries. How are you? What do you do? That kind of thing. And I kid you not, my hair was exactly like this. And he said, you remind me of a cartoon character. I said, okay. He took out his phone and he Googled the word gollywog and then showed me a picture on his phone like that. And I just remember thinking, what? Like, wow. And so for anyone that doesn't know what it is, they were popular dolls in the 20s, even before the 20s, I think. And they were characterized by having jet black skin, exaggerated lips, frizzy hair, and white rimmed eyes. Very similar to blackface, the blackface minstrels of the time, and widely regarded as racist, offensive. They're caricatures of Black people, and the word itself was historically used to tease Black people. So I knew exactly what this was. He didn't say anything. He didn't use any racist words. He just showed me this picture. And I was just, yeah, flawed. And for the rest of the night, I wasn't myself. I was snappy and I was just not me. And me and my girlfriend at the time, we got into an argument and I told her what he did. She tried to play it down. All her friends tried to play it down. And I was the bad person in that scenario. So even though, like, linking back to the report, even though this report was in 2018, I'm still hearing similar stories from friends and about the racist abuse that they get online or going out, dating apps, particularly my guy friends, no blacks, no Asians, no rice, no curry in some profiles. It's just relentless. And as I said, when you experience this kind of hate outside of your community, that's one thing.
Yeah.
You then naturally try to find your community. You try to find solace and acceptance elsewhere, and that is usually within your own community, right? So UK Black Pride or a network group in your organization. And then to be exposed to the same treatment, the same kind of behavior within your own community, it just leaves you feeling isolated and alone. So where do you go?
Yeah, exactly. I think you said so much there. I was just like, yeah. A lot of nodding, grinning, shaking the head. Yeah, I think one thing you said that I found really interesting is the discrimination that you feel if you are a person of color, a person of faith, or have family who are people of faith. And also your gender can sometimes play a part, and your sexual orientation. So all of these are facets of your identity, but you experience discrimination at each and every point. And then I think what was also interesting is sometimes the cognitive intrusions you get as an individual. So for example, your mum getting the sort of cognitive intrusions, these this internal battle essentially around, do I love my child and sponsor my child and support my child, or do I listen to what my community says and my faith says, but in doing that I'm excluding my child, or I'm making my child feel othered, essentially. And I think that's a part of the conversation we don't often talk about. We don't talk about these internal battles that not just parents have, but also people from within the community who have an intersection and with faith as well. And this constant being made to feel like you're doing something wrong, and being yourself is wrong because the Bible might say so, the Quran might say so, the Torah, or whatever faith you're a part of might say so. So I think it's really interesting that you shared that viewpoint, because we don't always talk about it. And I think often when we talk about discrimination, we talk about race, and we, very much just view it from a ethnicity perspective, but not really a faith part. And the second bit I just wanted to talk about was also the Stonewall report that came out in 2018 that said 50% of individuals from a Black, Asian, or minority ethnic background experience discrimination from within the LGBTQ plus community. Now, that was, what was that, 5 years ago now? That was, yeah, 5 years ago. So I just wonder what the stats will look like today, because currently we've just had the census report come out, and that's shown more people than ever. Well, firstly, it's the first time it's ever asked about sexual orientation. And we found that particularly people from the millennial category have come out as being part of the LGBTQ plus community. So thinking about those who are people of color, I wonder what the stats will look like now in terms of discrimination, and particularly that of microaggressions. Because I think what's happened in society is that we've become really clued up around conscious bias and direct discrimination, direct homophobia. But now a lot of what people do is the unconscious. And I'm saying unconscious because there's a debate whether is unconscious bias really unconscious.
Well, the minute you become conscious, where's the unconscious, right?
So just putting it out there. But now a lot of people use unconscious bias and microaggressions to be homophobic. Yeah. So I just wanted to get your views on what you think. What do you think the current climate looks like for particularly young people who are people of color, or are people of a faith that are coming out as LGBTQ plus in a society where they're only being formally recognized, or their sexual orientation is only being formally recognized?
This is the first time that the census has asked just how many LGBTQ people there are in the UK through 2 questions. Both of those questions were optional: which best describes your gender identity and which best describes your sexual orientation. And given the social climate, we've in the last 5 years, we've had the killing of George Floyd, we've had anti-racism protests, we've had the pandemic, and within that, there are so many other tensions arising across the globe. I don't really know how more progressive we actually are. Yeah. Because we know that as much progress as we make, we're at risk of having our rights rolled back as well. I know that when I came out 20 years ago, there weren't the pressures of social media like there are now. TikTok didn't exist, Instagram didn't exist. I came out quite privately to those closest to me. I think there's more visibility now, perhaps. There's more in the way of representation. I know that there's more agency within our community. So I know a lot of trans folk come online and make their own YouTube videos, just sort of describing their journey of transitioning. Those that are on the spectrum of LGBTQ will talk about, what it is to be asexual, what it is to be pan, through their lens. And I didn't have that when I came out. So you could argue that there's more information out there now. Is it easier perhaps for people to come out more than it was, say, 20, 30, 40 years ago? I think for me, the nuances are that if it is easier, or there is more agency, I think the acceptance is harder. Because we know that currently, I think there are 23 states in the US that have introduced anti-LGBT bills, and 13 of those states have signed them. So these restrictions on our lives are dangerous. They're a threat to our rights. With visibility, with exposure, comes more trolling, more judgment, more criticism. We only have to look backwards, through history to see that there were people that were pioneers. There were people that were fighting for our rights 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. And the liberation movement, the LGBTQ liberation movement, is still fighting for liberation today. So, those young folk who are struggling now only have to look back to see that hopefully it will get easier.
Yeah. And I think you're definitely right in what you say around more agency. And we know there's more support and more networks out there for young people who are a part of the LGBTQ plus community, but also people of color or faith. I know there's Iman, which is an organization for LGBTQ plus folk that are Muslim or identify as being Muslim. Black Pride, that you've also mentioned, and there is the House of Rainbow. There are so many networks and agencies there to support to support anyone who is a person of color and or faith, and part of the LGBTQ plus. So I think we're progressive in that way, but being progressive in that sense also means that we're seeing a lot more homophobia online. We're seeing a lot more, we're seeing the impact of homophobia on the LGBTQ plus community's mental health. I think trans people are more likely to suffer from ill mental health than any other group here in the UK. So I think there is so much more to be done, and there is so much with the good always comes the bad, right? And I think more visibility also encourages a lot more ignorance, I feel, around sexual orientation or around anything really. And I think it really amplifies, I don't want to say not ignorance, misinformation and confirmatory bias. So now I know I've seen a lot of anti-trans news of late, or anti-trans narratives of late around people are just faking being trans because they're predators or whatever it might be. But there are so many, there's a lot of negative narratives out there that sort of confirm the bias or confirm this phobia against the LGBTQ plus community.
You know, I think we need to really start to think about what it is we actually believe and where we sit, and we do need to be introspective as people, because we're not doing that enough. I think the LGBT community needs to be more introspective on itself and realize that it can't hide behind itself just because it's rooted in oppression. It needs to confront racism head on and look at the intersections of LGBT identities and race and the disproportionate effects of what people of colour go through. And that's just an example, I think, of what the community can do.
Yeah. Before we get into a full-blown sort of what else the community could do, because I think that's really important, I just wanted us to touch on, just to go back on the census really, and just touch on the fact, for me anyway, was looking at the census data and I thought, oh, this is great. But it's all really binary, isn't it? It's looking at sexual orientation on its own, ethnicity on its own, gender on its own, and everything was quite binary. They didn't display or they didn't report the data in an intersectional way. So just trying to do some research for our conversation today, and all I saw were those two questions. There was no data on the intersections of LGBTQ plus or sexual orientation. So I just wanted to get your thoughts around why it's important for us to have data that's intersectional, because all those, it would have been interesting to find out what background were all those individuals, or the majority of those individuals that filled out the census were from, or what's the data around sexual orientation and disability, and what does that picture look like for us here in the UK? So I just wanted to get your thoughts on why it's important, or why it's important that organizations, as well as the census or whoever, should be reporting on intersectional data.
So if we only report on one, I guess if we conflate all groups into one and assume that everyone of colour experience racism in the same way, then we won't be able to first identify what the barriers are and what the issues are for that particular community. And if we can't do that, then we can't remove them. And we just assume that everyone needs to be treated the same. And if we give everyone the same treatment, then everything will be okay. And that's not the case. So we do need to break the data down so that we can start to see what the impacts and the effects of discrimination are for those groups. So yes, it's progress that the census is now asking these questions. So we know that 1.5 million of the population identifies as LGBT or has a minority sexual orientation. We know that 500,000 people say that they have a gender identity different to the sex they were assigned at birth. Great. We need to break that down even further so that we can start tackling the real issues. Otherwise, we'll still be having these conversations in 10, 15, 20 years' time. So I think it's pretty obvious why we need to interrogate more and why we need to be asking more questions and better questions to capture the real life experiences of what it is to be LGBTQ, Black and disabled, or LGBTQ, Black and trans and disabled, and have a faith. And not only to remove barriers and deal with the root causes of discrimination, but also to celebrate these communities as well, and find the joy in what it is to be, a person of colour, because there is so much joy in our community. And we need to be asking the right questions so that we can start talking about what that joy looks like.
I think that's an amazing answer. And I think just as you were speaking, I was just thinking that it's really important for us to have an intersectional lens so we can best support colleagues in our organizations, but also in society, right? And they say representation matters. It matters. If you are a young Black kid from the Midlands, maybe probably only a few of you that are Black in your community, and you are also LGBTQ plus, you don't see that on TV, or you don't see that in your area, but you are seeing it in a report, and you know there are many more around you. It inspires you, and it allows for growth as well. So I just think, so I think intersectional lens is the way forward to really further break down barriers, but also to start looking at equity rather than equality, as you were saying, because, we're not all one way, we're not all binary beings, we're all different, and one size won't fit all. So it's thinking about how then, as organizations, but also in society, can we ensure that we're looking at everything through an equitable lens? And the only way I think we can do that is through an intersectional lens, because then you can truly understand the barriers, but also celebrate representation too, like you said. It's LGBTQ plus History Month and Race Equality Week this week. What can organizations be doing to further advance race equality, or equity, should I say, but also further advance LGBTQ plus inclusion?
I think workplaces are still in the mindset of initiatives and celebrations. And I've got a real problem with the word initiative, because it sounds very ad hoc and one-off, and like communities are a project. You've
done an initiative.
Yeah. Let's pat ourselves on the back. We did that last year. Now let's focus on the next thing this year. It doesn't really work like that. So if workplaces are still in the mindset of marking and celebrating events and things like that, then be really intentional. Bring your groups together, bring your network groups together. That's a really simple way of collaborating, and storytelling is great. Storytelling brings people together. They build connections. What underpins EDI work? Community and trust. Okay, So bringing your groups together to build that community and to build that trust is a really effective way, I think. Embed this more strategically. I think using your network groups and your ERGs in a more strategic way, and building what they're doing into your strategic plans, I think is, again, a really effective way of marking these days, these months, and these events. And I think organisations just need to have a really critical, look at themselves, and they need to confront these issues head on. If they don't, there's no progress and there's no movement, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the only thing I'll add to that is the employee resource network groups, whatever you may call them in your organization. I think there needs to be a lot more collaboration and co-production happening within these groups. I think often we don't get to a place of intersectionality, or we don't further advance together equity or inclusion in certain areas because we're not working collaboratively together, can't speak, or co-producing together enough. So organizations say, oh, Black, you can go to the race equity group, or you can go to the BAME staff network group. Oh, you identify as LGBTQ, you're in that box. But actually what we should be saying is there are so many people that identify with so many of these ERGs, and allowing them the space to be a part of those groups, regardless of where they identify or what they identify with, but then also allowing these groups to work together to further advance equity within their marginalized group. So I think that's what we need to be doing as organizations. And for Race Equality Week, for me, is an LGBTQ History Month, I would like to see more collaboration. I know Stonewall are collabing with Black Pride, a nice collaboration, but I think in terms of other organizations is coming together and collaborating more. Because if we're just going to leave it as, okay, LGBTQ people in this corner, Black people in this corner, you do what you're both doing, but you never come, the two shall never meet, then we're not really advancing equity. We're rather advancing equality. And I think we've moved on from that now, and we need to be thinking about equity and how we ensure that we are advancing it for everyone, regardless of their protected group or how they identify.
And that's why I said Race Equity Week, because I think language is important. Yeah. If you're somebody that's very new to this space and very new to this work, language is the thing that you'll latch on to. Language is the thing that you'll start, is probably the place that you'll start. And if you're faced with something, or if you see something, that is the language you'll use. But if we use language that shifts people's mindsets and gets them to a place more quickly, we need to start using more progressive language. And you and I have talked a lot about equality versus equity, what they both mean and the difference. And so I think we need to start reframing our language better.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Okay, Emma, I think that's coming to the end of our chat. Oh, sad
already.
I know, #sad times. Before you go though, you mentioned about joy and looking at Black joy, or and also LGBTQ plus joy. And I just wanted you to share a joyful moment for you as a person of color, but also as someone who's part of the LGBTQ plus community.
Any joyful moment, or a joyful moment that kind of brought those two things together?
I think a joyful moment that kind of brought those two things together.
I think for me, when I was at Stonewall, we ran a young campaigners role model program for Black, Asian, minority, ethnic young people. And I was a facilitator that weekend, and it was a 2-day residential. And all these young Black and brown people came together in a space. We ran workshops. We helped them build their own campaigns. And we just took them through a 2-day workshop on what it means to be Black or brown LGBTQ in today's world. And yeah, the inspiration that I felt after that 2 days was just incredible. And it made me reflect on myself as a mixed heritage Black woman who's LGBTQ, and where I sit in the world and where I move. And it just gave me hope that, you know, we've got these incredible young people, young Black and brown LGBTQ people in the world, and they're doing incredible things, and they've got aspirations to do incredible things. And it did really give me hope as a brown person who's LGBTQ myself, that we're going to be okay, that we're going to be all right. And even if it is tough, even if it is hard, even if it is challenging, and there are people in the world like that who are trying to change things. And it was a hard weekend. It was tough for a lot of reasons, but there was so much joy in that weekend, and I'll never forget it.
Oh, that's amazing, Emma. Thank you so much. I had my coaching last week, and I was speaking to someone who works in the anti-racism space, and they said to me the thing that they were talking in terms of racism, systemic racism hates more than anything is hope. Like, they hate if the system can take away your hope, then that's the system winning, right? That's goal for them. Yeah. And I think that goes across all forms of oppression and discrimination, is if systemic homophobia can take your joy, then it's won. Hope, then it's won. And also your joy, because joy then creates hope. So I think my closing remark would just be, try not to let your hope die. This work is hard. It's difficult. If you identify as being part of a marginalized group and you feel your voice is not being heard, just take it from me, and I'm sure Emma can also reiterate, is that your voice is being heard. At least one person is hearing you and is feeling inspired by what you're saying, and that's all we need. We just need to inspire one person at a time. And to keep the hope alive, so we can smack discrimination or whatever oppression in its head and live in a society that's more equitable, that's representative, but also inclusive for all. So that's it from me. A bit of a MLK moment there. Cringe. Hashtag cringe. Thank you once again, Emma. I truly appreciate you coming on today and speaking so openly, honestly, with such compassion and enthusiasm about this, and I hope that people feel inspired, and that we continue the movement, we continue the work. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's watched today. Do get in touch. I'll put Emma's details in the description section for you to get in touch with Emma on LinkedIn, and also me, should you wish. And hopefully we'll see you next time on Monday Moments with Mabinti.
Big love, Mabinti.
Bye. If you enjoyed that episode and want to connect or want to see more content, make sure to follow me on these social media platforms: LinkedIn at Mabinti Eshaw, Instagram and YouTube at Monday Moments with Mabinti. I look forward to seeing you all very soon, and don't forget to like, follow and share.